Hello, I'm David Gray, and today we're going to talk about exploring workplaces of successful workers with disabilities. Here's my colleague Carrie Morgan to tell you more.
Greetings, I'm Carrie Morgan. We both work at the Washington University Program in Occupational Therapy, where we're on faculty there. And we both know a little bit about the topic working with a disability. I use a manual wheelchair as my colleague uses a power wheelchair. We both have had different experiences working with a disability and have studied this for the past 5 years. We would like to acknowledge a bunch of folks that helped us with this project. We had funding that was crucial to making this project happen through at the time, it's called the DIBTAC of the Great Plains ADA Center. We also had some funding through other grants through NIDR, National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation. We've had many people that have assisted with this project, including Megan Gottlieb, the program coordinator, research assistant Lindsay Miller, and last but not least, our statistician Holly Hollingsworth, who's helped with a lot of the statistics. So we're going to do this in kind of some pieces. So Dr. Gray is going to start out with giving a little bit of background on kind of the first part of the project.
Great.
And I'll jump in on the second part when we start talking about the videotaping.
All right, just to make sure you understand, this is not endorsed by the Department of Education. Thank you. As Carrie said, we're both using mobility devices and we both work. So it's pretty natural that we want to know about other people who use mobility devices and why they aren't all working. So we took this approach because it's, in one way, it gives us a cause in life. And we're hoping that through our research, there'll be an effect. And the effect would be increasing the numbers of people who use mobility devices in the workforce. So the overview of this presentation is we're going to look at the personal characteristics and work environment factors of workers who use mobility devices. We'll describe an initial survey. We'll talk about some interviews and videos that we made of interviews with 33 employed people with disabilities. Now, some of them were blind and others were had hearing loss, but most of them used a mobility device. Then we created a survey called the Mobility Device User Work Survey, or the MWS, and then we'll summarize the findings of a study of 132 employed mobility device users, and then finally we'll make some recommendations for future research. So, I'm not going to go on with a long background on the history of people with physical disabilities not working. It's pretty clear. There's actually hundreds of studies that show the percentage of unemployed individuals between the ages of 21 and 64 are way below the population rates. A spinal cord injury, for example, is a group that's anywhere from 22% to 39% unemployed, depending on when you take the data. Obviously, immediately after release from the hospital, you're probably not going to be employed. There are a lot of barriers to employment, and many studies invoke all these factors to explain the high rate of unemployment. But what about the work environments of successfully employed people with physical impairments and limitations? Let's find out. So our first study was to develop a survey, and this idea was to find out if we could get a sample to find out if they would be able to answer the questions. And we did get some results, which you'll see a little bit later in the presentation. In this sample of 99 people, we had physical, visual, or hearing impairments. They had to work for 20 hours. The total number of years employed was a mean of 24, with a range of 5 to 50. They had to be in competitive work in 4 states: Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, or Kansas. So the mean age was about 48. the primary diagnosis, the largest group were in spinal cord injury, followed by cerebral palsy, and then a gigantic mix of others. So what are the initial questions? First, it's a web-based survey that included questions on demographics, health, personal assistance services, assistive technologies, transportations. Then we looked at the work participation evaluation by the workers, whether they thought it was important, how much choice they had, did they have control, and were they satisfied. The next one was work receptivity by co-workers. How are these workers with impairments treated by their co-workers, and we have a scale for that. Then there's the worksite rules, and we all know that a somewhat lenient manager is easy to work for than someone who insists on being in time or 15-minute break and those kinds of stringent rules. Then we have some questions on management support. Does your manager back you up, help get you promoted, tell you what's good and bad about your performance? And then we ask them about work concerns based on some earlier work at the University of Minnesota and Arkansas. And then work satisfaction, we drew from both of those places to create the questions. So the web-based survey took approximately an hour to complete. There was one phone survey requested, and all participants were reimbursed. Here's just a spattering sampling of the results. First thing was the accessibility of a work site. If you can't get in, you can't work. So if you look at the general building, you got accessible parking is way up there. Flat sidewalks, level entries are good. Unfortunately, features like elevators and handrails aren't often found, and signage for accessible features was below 50%. Now if we look at the work areas, it's interesting to see that the accessible bathrooms covered in the ADA and wide clear spaces are right, well above 50%. They're in the 80 to 90%. But background noise and accessible phones, TTYs, are less than 50% of the places that we surveyed. Here's what we find to be interesting in terms of the effect of personal assistance services on work difficulty. You'll see here that without help at work, some of the tasks are impossible. And with help, a lot of the tasks are either easy or very easy. Now, what's the impact of assistive technology on work difficulty? You can see that without a device at work, 40% of the people said, hey, I can't, that's an impossible task. Whereas if they have a device, it's almost 80, 90% that say it's easy or very easy. Certainly, Carrie and I would agree with that finding. All right, this is study 2.1, and my colleague, Carrie Morgan, will take over the narration.
Great. Slide in here. All right. So Dr. Gray just went through the self-report survey that people took web-based. So the second piece of this is we actually went out and did semi-structured interviews and videotape people actually in their work site doing their job tasks. So of the 99 participants, we saw 33 of them through the 4-state region. So we went on a road trip through Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska. We received consent from employers so that we could go into their sites. And really what we were trying to do is go learn more about how people work, how they get to work, what's working for them, and how they're being successful. And what we realized is when we go in and we actually videotape people, that we were actually capturing some things that we weren't capturing through the surveys. So on the surveys, we asked people about the assistive technology they use. And then with the cameras, we would actually videotape them doing their job tasks. And all of a sudden, there's these pieces of assistive technology that they were using that they didn't even realize they were using to self-report it. These interviews and videos were kind of twofold. We kind of wanted to use these to be able to have videos to show people with disabilities, look, people with disabilities are working. This is how they do it. This is the technology they're using. But we also used it as a purpose of collecting research data of how people are actually doing their job tasks. So the folks that we saw, the mean age was 48 years old. Our youngest participant was 26, our oldest was 71. These were folks that had been employed for a while. So mean years of employment was about 25 years. And they were at their current job for approximately 10 years. And they were pretty much working at least part-time, but mostly full-time. As you can see, the hours per week at their primary job was 35 hours. The folks that we saw were kind of across different, but we were doing it on purpose. We were trying to get people in different areas of work. So we saw some folks in health and welfare industry, education and research, finance and records, legal, and entertainment. We really had the most luck getting to folks that worked in a disability sensitive area. So we saw a lot of folks in independent living centers, but we really tried to get a wide range of jobs. So the first part of it was we did a semi-structured interview where we just asked them questions. We were basically trying to get their job history, what their job history was and how they got the job they're currently in, what were the barriers they encountered, what was their job training that they received, steps in acquiring their accommodations, so the accommodations that they currently have, what was the process they went through to get those, do they use personal assistants at work, and what was their interactions or what are their interactions with their coworkers that work around them. All participants were reimbursed for their time for doing this. So again, this interview portion was more of a qualitative piece, and we had a lot of qualitative information. So the first piece I'm going to share with you is related to transportation and work support, and these two quotes kind of show some themes and trends that we saw across all 33 people. These are just a few examples. The first person said that transportation has always been an issue because it's hit or miss. I'm supposed to get to work at 8:30, but I might wind up getting there at 9. My work is very understanding. Somebody's on standby, that is good because a lot of places aren't always that understanding. So kind of that flexibility component is what we were hearing a lot from people. That was very important. This next person said, I've gotten out of the car and discovered there's ice in the parking lot. I get on my cell phone and someone comes out and helps me get in the building. This person said it's pretty easy. So they're willing to do things where I don't have to worry about my safety or worry about falling. The next part was about personal assistant services, and we heard a lot of different things here. So some people had their own personal assistant that actually would come to work with them. Some people use kind of more informal personal assistants at work, so a coworker might help them for a couple of minutes do something. This person said we have an attendant who's kind of a general attendant for anybody who might need them. So occasionally if my legs are not cooperating, I can have her follow me out to my car and I can drive my scooter out there and she drives it back in instead of parking where I normally park it and walk it out there myself. So the trickiest part to this whole thing was getting consent or approval to come in with a video camera and start taping people. The interview part usually went pretty well. We would just videotape them at their work environment in their office or their cubicle or wherever they're working. But then when we actually take a video camera and start walking around and following them, doing their essential jobs, we had to do a little bit of convincing of why we're doing this, and that really what we're trying to document is the positive aspects. So once we explained it, we usually were given permission. So what we try to do here is in the interview portion, we'd have people tell us their 5 essential job tasks that they were doing at their job. And we would try to actually videotape them doing those jobs throughout the day. The video clips are edited for time, so where we might videotape them for a couple minutes or even 10 minutes doing a job task. We really cut them down just to clips so you get pieces or ideas of the components of doing these job tasks. So the video clips are edited for time 15 to 30 seconds for content. The clips are organized by the types of assistive technology people were using, the personal assistants they use, the different industry or the different job titles that they had, and the job tasks listed on the survey were compared to those on ONET. So here's a few examples. When we're videotaping folks, we try to get several different angles of them doing their job tasks. We try to get a front, a side, a back, so you can see all the technology and all the supports that they're using. But we would also take photos. We could get close-ups of exactly the setup people are using. So these are a couple examples of assistive technology that people are using specifically at their desk. So on the left side, you see a cordless optical trackball mouse. And on the right side, you see a tenodesis splint. You see an adapted pencil with an eraser top used for typing and for using the trackball that's on the right side of the keyboard. So here's an example of a video clip that's been edited. So you can see the job title, the diagnosis of the person, and the mobility device that they use. So this is an accommodation of wide open space. Basically what you're seeing in this video is how this particular wheelchair user set up their office space so that they can move around freely.
Typing, I figured out by using this hand on the space bar, and then this one to type with. It's just the hunt and peck, but it works pretty well. And of course, having Word that I built in spell check. Typing on a computer can be fun. And a lot of it depends on how I can sticky. So by just gently wetting my fingers, it makes it a little bit more sticky to type with.
So that's an example of what a videotape would look like, but we have many videotapes of many different folks with different diagnosis, mobility-related diagnosis, doing these job tasks. So you can see on the screen that there's folks with spinal cord injury, there's a participant that has multiple sclerosis that does farming in the way that he was adapting the farming. Those are just a few examples. So the way we've organized the online video clips is by several different ways. So on the top left of the screen, you could search by impairment, by job industry, by job title, or by accommodation, as this one shows. You could also search by, if you're looking at how somebody uses personal assistance to do a job task, or how somebody uses their assistive technology. You can also search for person device, environment device, or occupation device. So is it something that's built into the environment? Is it something that's on the person that they're actually using and taking with them everywhere? Or is it something specific that they're using for their specific job or an occupational device? And you could search for specific. So if you're looking for, we saw a lot of the same things, but done in a different way. So a lot of ways to raise or lower a desk. A lot of different organizational tools, computer programs, and our equipment. So if you want to see different examples of what these look like, you could search that way as well. And I think that's where I turn it back over to Dr. Gray.
Thank you very much, Carrie Morgan. Carrie, by the way, is working on her PhD. It'll be nice to call her Dr. Morgan. So the third study we did was to try to develop a survey that other people could use. And the survey has a somewhat unremarkable title, Mobility Device User Work Survey. We like to call it the MWS. The objective of this study was to develop this measure and include many of the factors that contribute to successful employment. The participants in this sample were 183 workers who used power wheelchairs, manual wheelchairs, cane crutches, or walkers, and they completed the MWS once. It was sent back to them, and 132 of them filled it out again, clearly for test-retest reliability. So the methods were that the participants completed the online version of the MWS, and the statistical analysis we did was a multivariate analysis and a two-step multiple linear regression analysis. A quick description of the MWS has escaped my abilities, so I will leave this on the screen for just a minute and tell you that we basically had a lot of questions on demographics, personal assistance use, awards, promotion. Those of you who are familiar with the satisfactoriness scale at the University of Minnesota's theory of work adjustment would say, aha, they have some things that we can calculate or estimate a satisfactoriness score, which basically says the employer is satisfied with the work of the person. But then we also had 58 questions that were more subjective evaluations. We put them into 5 scales. The first one was work task evaluation, asking about the tasks that they do. Were they important to them? Do they have any control, choice, or satisfaction? The second group was coworker communications, and that's the manager's communication as well as the people they work with. The next one is work site receptivity. We borrowed this from some of the other surveys that we developed, and it's really looks at how coworkers treat people who use these mobility devices. We'll get into more of this later. And then there's the work site receptivity, the employer support work rules, coworker assistance, and work site usability. And then finally, the work concerns and work satisfaction questions. The psychometrics look pretty good. The internal consistency is 0.72 to 0.93 and test-retest 0.70 to 0.80. And now for some description of who was in this sample. It's an average age of about 63, ranging from 22 to 73. 53% were female, and unfortunately we didn't have a lot of African American or other races. It was mainly a study of white people, 90%, and 61% or so were married, and this is really astounding. 4 or more years of college, 74% of the sample had that. So this may explain why they were successful in not only getting a job, but keeping one. A little bit more demographics. You can see that 64.5% earned more than $35,000. Their health was good, very good, or excellent, 81.7%, which is pretty amazing given all the negativism on the health of people with disabilities being used as a way of not hiring us. And the primary diagnosis, highest group was spinal cord injury, but we had quite a scattering of them. And power wheelchairs made up 43% of the sample. Now, a couple results. So what is the impact of personal assistance services at work? You can see that when you have help at work, almost all the tasks are easy or very easy. Whereas if you don't, there's some that say 5% are impossible, and 30% are very difficult, and another 30% are just plain difficult. So that's a lot of difficulty if you don't have help. But this is even more impressive. The impact of assistive technology on work difficulty. If you don't have your devices to help you out, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble getting things done. In fact, 70% of the group answered it's either impossible or very difficult if you don't have your device that you rely on. Now this is the communication components, and these are some of the questions that we asked. The first ones are in green, look at you and speak directly to you, and those are on a 4-point scale. The 3.69 and the 3.72 are pretty high. And it's also a positive finding that the indirect or negative communication items like treat you as a child and avoid you are very infrequently reported, 0.3 and 0.45. The worksite environment and management support scale shows, look at all those threes. That means they're pretty much in agreement with all those statements, especially coworkers provide assistance when asked to provide help. For the work concern scale, there's not much concern except for doing a good job. Advancing in the job, wanting to be more specialized in my job, not a whole lot of agreement with that statement, and having many friends at work, pretty low too. In fact, the whole socialization thing was pretty low. For work satisfaction, the job provides for a steady employment. It's always important, and it was rated highly. But they did have a little criticism for the supervisor and how they trained workers. They rated self-accomplishment component highly, especially I do things that make use of my abilities. And the compensation one had sort of a contrast. The job provides opportunity for advancement, not much, but my pay compares well with other workers, pretty well agreed to. And then apparently people who use mobility devices don't like supervising others. That was given a 2.42, not a high rating. Okay. Now, Dr. Hollingsworth helped us put together a analysis of relationships of work evaluation scale to work satisfaction. And so all those scales we've been talking about, these are the 4 that showed pretty good relationship with work satisfaction, especially worksite receptivity and support. Significance level 0.000, hard to beat that. So the summary is that the study participants had very few health conditions that influence their work. I didn't give you the tables on that, but bottom line is they may have report pain and fatigue and other secondary conditions at a high rate, but when you ask them, do those conditions have any influence on your work performance, they all drop very low, well below 20%. The employee satisfactoriness to their employees was high. Remember we talked about they get awards and promotions at a pretty good rate, at least at a rate that they feel is acceptable. The accessibility of the work site was high. If you can't get in, you can't work. If your work module is not accessible, you're probably not going to be too successful. The assistive technologies were inexpensive. We know they were effective. There's all this concern that if you're a person with a mobility device, the management's going to have to pay a lot to get equipment. Well, that didn't hold up. Bottom line is the insurance company will pay, the health insurance company will pay for your wheelchair, which is the biggest expense. And a lot of the other ones are things you bring into work. Personal assistance was used infrequently, and it was very often unpaid, but it was very effective when it was there. The coworker communications were very positive. Flexible work rules and supportive managers were highly valued. Work concerns were low, and job satisfaction positively correlated with accessibility, work tasks, coworker communication, and work support. So This survey paints a pretty interesting picture of successful people with mobility limitations. This work will be published in August of 2014, and there are the references. And if you want to look at more YouTubes on this, you have two choices. You can go to the website that's in the title bar, or you can go to the YouTube addresses below. Now, quick review of some thoughts we've had on future research. Can the factors important for studying work fit the ICF classification framework? People outside the United States actually have paid attention to the ICF, and some countries are using it for distribution of funds in the community. So maybe we should see if it has a place in our studies on employment. Second, can we collect a large enough sample to do a structured equation modeling for the purpose of understanding the relative contributions of the many factors influencing the person times work fit? You've been patient and heard a bunch of them. There are more, you'll see soon. Would doing a structured equation modeling of the various factors hypothesized to influence job acquisition help to clarify what factors need attention? So this is the ICF, or the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health, and I put in some of the factors that have been alleged to have something to do with work, predicting work, successful work, and what are some of the variables. We didn't get into the type of industry or the type of job title. We looked at that, but we just didn't have a large enough sample. So some of these issues will have to be addressed with the larger N group. Now here's an easy slide to read. This is a potential structured equation model of the person-work environment. Now on the left side, you'll see all those person factors. On the right side, you'll see the environment factors. And if we had a large enough sample, maybe 600 people, we could look at the relationship between the person and the work environment. And the last dreamland one I'll show you is a structured equation modeling for mobility device user satisfaction with work. You'll see the blue bubble and our attempts to look at what might contribute to it from a person factor and what might contribute to it through the environment. Sorry, I lied. Next, this is the last one. Factors to consider in studying work acquisition. This is another one of these structured equation modeling diagrams. And since there's a lot of work on acquisition of employment, maybe some of the people who have authored them could think about doing some kind of analysis that looked at the relative influence of each of those factors. Thank you very much. Have a good day. We're done.